So we've covered a bunch of ground in our little mini lectures, and we're done here today, at the end of, not today, but the end of this lecture, with political theory. And we've been building up to the American Constitution. So we took a look, okay, what's politics, what's science, we've done all of that, and then we tried to get at this question of government or state coercion. What is it that makes this thing, this monopoly of violence of power, as Weber calls it, justifiable? And we said that there were three major eras that answered this question differently, different eras of political philosophers. And all of these eras are going to influence our own Constitution, either at the outset or as it moves along. It's going to change our system of government radically. And we first looked at the ancient theorists, and we saw the balance and the lie. Then we moved on to taking a look at the Enlightenment theorists last time. Locke, who will influence our Bill of Rights. Rousseau, which will influence this continual battle between capitalism and Marxism. And Hobbes, whose understanding of what states should do will be the idea that we don't want to have anarchy, will hugely impact the United States. And so today we're going to take a look at Rawls and Easton, or modern theorists. And modern theorists will end up going a slightly different route. And let's start by taking a look at Rawls. Rawls is much more contemporaneously. He is going to live from 1921 to 2002, so not that long ago. And he is going to be kind of like the social contract theorists. He's going to be interested in justifying government, but he's going to come to some radically different conclusions. And part of the reason for this is he's going to throw out that state of nature stuff. He's going to say, look, I'm not sure what this would look like. There probably wasn't ever a time or a history of life when anybody was like this. So really, do we need that? And his answer is no. And instead he says, let's start with a thought experiment, a thought idea. And he says, let's think about what's called the original position. He says, imagine we're in the original position, and that is where we're all behind, let's use something else, the veil of ignorance. And behind the veil of ignorance, I don't know anything about me or you other than that we are persons. I don't know if I'm smart or dumb. I don't know if I'm rich or poor. I don't know if I'm white, black, or anything else. I don't know anything besides I'm me. And that you are another person. And I don't know if you're a man or a woman. I don't know your ethnicity. I don't know how much you make or anything else about us. And he says, look, if we were in that kind of position, if we were here, what kind of society would we create? So in other words, what would be the rules? What kinds of rules would we throw out if we were behind the veil of ignorance in the original position? And it's interesting because Rawls will then say, look, a just social contract is one that's going to be based on one that would come out of the original position. And what would come out of this original position? And he said, well, more or less, a kind of welfare state. He's going to say, look, if when the veil comes down and we're stupid, do we want the distribution of money to be just on the basis of stupidity? In other words, if I'm stupid, I won't eat or have health care? Or would we want to have restrict voting to only men, only to find that we're actually a woman? Or vice versa? And Rawls says no. And so as a result, he's going to argue that we need to have a society that tries to be equal. And this is going to be a huge ideological position. And a shift for many people in the United States. This idea that there could be a justification for the welfare state. Now, Easton. David Easton. Easton is going to be part of another school. And this school basically says, look, Ancient theorists have tried it. Enlightenment theorists have tried it. Modern theorists have tried it. This whole question of, it's insolvable. You can't figure out justice. You can't do it. Stop trying. How do you think it's going to work out? And instead, they're going to say, let's focus on something else. Let's ask a different kind of question. What kinds of societies are considered just by their participants? In other words, why do we consider our government just in the United States or our state just in the United States and they don't in Peru? Why would we have an overthrown one and overthrown another? And Easton said this is a solvable problem because it is a science problem. Remember back when we talked about is's and oughts? Basically, what Easton is saying is, forget the ought and focus on the is. And this leads to what's called the systems model. And this is kind of a map of the systems model. He says, look, governments are they can be all different kinds. They're a black box of things happening. They have their own rules, their own organizational structures, their own institutions. People want and make demands and supports of the stuff that is happening, and they want to have done. These are inputs. Governments will take these inputs and spit them out in different ways and result in outcomes. They'll change the laws, they'll change the environments, the regulations, and everything else. And as a result of these outcome differences, the environment will shift. The way that people live, and work change. On the result of this, we'll have different kinds of inputs that leads to different demands and supports, which becomes new outcomes, and so it goes and it goes and it goes. But basically what Easton says is that as long as this is moving, as long as there's a free flow, people are going to consider that just. But if there ends up being a roadblock somewhere, if there's pent-up demands and supports for things that don't happen and don't happen and don't happen, they'll eventually have to bypass government. And when they start bypassing government, the state will be considered unjust. And Easton says, this we can look at, right? We don't care what really is ultimately just or not just. That's an impossible question. Rather, what we want to focus on is when do the participants in this environment consider something just or unjust? And that we can answer. Now, here's the big elements from our two individuals today. Rawls is going to be arguing for a very different kind of society, a society in which we think of the state as being the mover and shaker when it comes to kind of having a subsistence level or a moderate level of the way we should live. And Easton is going to say, nah, ditch this whole long question. There'll be other theorists like him. Instead, let's focus on creating governments that will be considered just by their participants because they are indicative of demands and supports from the people generally. I think you can begin to see some of the influences that are taking place here on the American political system. So we have finished up our theory section and our introductory section. And what we're going to begin next in our next series of lectures is going to be taking a look at the constitutions, yes, plural, of the United States and at how we got a little tiny bit of history and how we got to those particular constitutions. But for now, that's the end.